Welcome to the Case of the Week podcast, where each week we break down a recent decision in electronic discovery case law and talk about the practical impact for you and your clients, and keep you up to date on your obligations with electronically stored information as evidence. If you're a litigator, legal professional, or you love the power of ESI as much as I do, this is the place to be. I'm Kelly Twigger, the CEO and founder of eDiscovery Assistant and the principal at ESI Attorneys, with more than 25 years of experience navigating the evolving landscape of litigation and eDiscovery. I'm a practicing attorney, author, speaker, entrepreneur, and now podcaster who works as a discovery strategist and expert for clients at ESI Attorneys and to provide that knowledge to all legal professionals through our eDiscovery Assistant platform. In each episode, we'll tackle a new decision in eDiscovery case law and how it shapes both your litigation strategy and planning for risk mitigation. If you're ready for blunt, actionable insights that keep you ahead of the curve, and maybe a few laughs along the way, this is your go-to podcast. Subscribe or follow now to start embracing the power of ESI as evidence. Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of our Case of the Week series brought to you by eDiscovery Assistant. We are incredibly excited to have you join us for this final episode of 2024 and to celebrate our 4-year anniversary of the Case of the Week. Amazing. I can't believe it's been 4 years. My name is Kelly Twigger. I am the CEO and founder at eDiscovery Assistant and the principal at ESI Attorneys. I'm so happy to be welcoming two of my colleagues from the industry today, very special guests, Stephanie Wilkins and Erin Patton. So yay. Thanks, guys, for joining us. Most of you know that when I invite guests to our Case of the Week, I always try to bring different perspectives to add to my thoughts, and this week is no exception. So let me introduce our two guests. Most of you likely know Stephanie Wilkins. She is the former editor-in-chief of legaltech News at ALM and is now the content director for legaltech Hub. Stephanie was also a practicing attorney in big law before moving into journalism, so she knows and understands the issues that lawyers are facing every day. Her outstanding work in journalism for the legal tech space was recognized last year when she was included in the Fast Case 50, and again this year as the recipient of the inaugural journalism winner at the Legal Technology Awards. She and her team did incredible work at ALM and really elevated the coverage of our legal tech news exponentially. So we certainly miss you in that role. But I do think my favorite thing about Stephanie, and I took this from your LinkedIn, is that you're a boxer in training. So I love that. Yeah. Thanks for being here, Steph.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Next up, celebrity persona in the eDiscovery space, Erin Patton, who we all know as Gates Dogfish, the publisher of incredibly hilarious and spot-on memes on social media related to eDiscovery. As Gates Dogfish, Erin has published just under 600 memes on social media since 2022. He's an attorney and the managing director at TrustPoint, a well-known service provider in the industry. He's got a ton of technical knowledge to share with us today, including some fabulous memes. So thanks for joining us, Erin.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
I can never figure out whether I should call you Erin or Gates, because Gates is
Erin. Let's go with Erin.
Today's episode marks our 164th episode with 39 of those in 2024. I know, it's crazy. I can't believe anyone would listen to me talk that much. It's incredible that the pace of case law in eDiscovery continues to evolve so rapidly. We're approaching 40,000 decisions in eDiscovery Assistant with more than 4,700 decisions this year so far. So on our previous anniversary episodes on which we welcomed David Horrigan and Doug Austin, we've done more of a summary of decisions that we've seen on key topics. And while we'll do a little bit of that, I wanted to back out a little bit and look at the bigger picture as we end 2024 into 2025 and really see what's happening in the industry on some of these key topics. So we spend so much time discussing them, but what's really happening? And so Erin and Stephanie are going to give us those perspectives as well today. And I think that's just incredibly important. And before we dive into some of those meaty topics, though, you guys both had one issue that you said still seems to come up all the time, and that is the ever controversial dash or no dash in eDiscovery. Stephanie, what are your thoughts?
I personally don't like the dash. I did a poll on LinkedIn a month or two ago. I gave 3 options. I gave the big D and little d with no dash option. But if you combine those two together, 77% went for no dash and only 20% went for the dash. I think there's something interesting to talk about in the 3% after we break down Aaron's opinion.
I'm firmly in the dash camp and have been since 2006, probably.
Yeah.
Same. And I've actually been, the memes that seem to get so much attention are these kind of nitty gritty niche memes, like the one that we're talking about right now. I just had one up from Futurama where he's squinting at people who use a hyphen in eDiscovery. And Martha McPherson's most recent one, her inspiration for it was A Christmas Story. I'll share that one real quick. And it's poor Ralphie getting soap in his mouth for using eDiscovery the wrong way.
eDiscovery the wrong way with a dash, I might add.
Exactly. This is how he was taught that it's eDiscovery, lowercase e, uppercase D.
Yeah. And for those of you who aren't watching the video, we'll make sure that there's a link to the individual memes so you can be able to see them, since you won't be able to view them on the screen. And Aaron,
Absolutely.
You mentioned there was something that came out of the Georgetown conference that was compelling on this issue.
Yeah. Also, it was an interesting. So as everyone's kind of using it, how do I start this? When talking about eDiscovery, electronic discovery, e-discovery, one of the things that jogged in my memory from Georgetown was that, and I forget who said it, but they said that we're reaching an inflection point where more people will have been working in the eDiscovery software and they'll have grown up in eDiscovery software than the people who are around from the paper days who bridged the gap into electronic discovery. And it was a really kind of an interesting thought because we were joking around about slip sheets, right? And I think they're called placeholders now when you're doing it in production. But there was a time when we were dropping pink slips of paper between documents and then, green slips of paper for families, like manually affixing Bates stickers. And there's going to come a time when people won't know what a DII file is.
Right.
It's coming.
Yeah.
They can look it up, but it's coming when people won't know.
People ask me this all the time. Why eDiscovery versus just discovery? Isn't all discovery electronic? Well, 99% of it is electronic. But the difference for me is that eDiscovery is a whole new set of rules and issues that we didn't have with paper discovery. And is it all part of discovery? It absolutely is. But the issues that we have are unique to ESI. Therefore, in my view, they're eDiscovery issues. So that's my thought on the dash versus no dash and complexity of eDiscovery versus just discovery.
And I will say the 3% that was neither or the other write-in, they were all universally just drop the E altogether. It's just discovery.
And you know what? I felt like people actually knew what they were doing when it comes to eDiscovery across the board. Obviously, there are lots of people who do know what they're doing, but there are a lot of people who still aren't. And we see that all the time in the case law. And I think when we get to the point where people understand what the issues are in eDiscovery, then maybe it does just become discovery. And that language is just language. Let's turn to another big topic from this year, and that is hyperlinked files. I know I feel like I've talked this issue to death. I've done 2 webinars, if not 3, multiple presentations on the hyperlinked files issue. And I think we were going to kick this off with the general discussion. And Steph, you raised the question of what do we even call these? You want to tackle that?
Yeah, I mean, because I've seen a lot of discussion out there, like modern attachments versus hyperlinks. And I think calling them hyperlinked files or hyperlinked attachments covers it. Because if you just put hyperlinks, people don't necessarily know you're talking still about files. Modern attachments, to me, just is sort of fluff and meaningless. I also think that this is an issue that even the fact that we're debating what to call them, I've seen so deeply in the eDiscovery community. And I think outside of it is still just a mystery. I think if I picked somebody who was not in eDiscovery at all and said, what do you think a modern attachment is? Or what are we doing with hyperlinks? They would be so not anywhere along the spectrum of
What are
what
you talking about? Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Aaron, how do you guys address it at Trust Point?
So we have some workflows to address it, but before I get to that, I think one thing that is really interesting is that all of the context in which I've seen the discussions has been about hyperlinked files in communications.
Mhm.
But those hyperlinked files are everywhere. They're in Evernote, they're in DocuSign, they're in Salesforce.
Mhm.
My prediction for 2025 is we're going to start to see case law about these hyperlinked files that's outside of messaging and outside of communications. And in
Right.
that scenario, are they attachments? We'll see.
Yeah, I think you raise a really important point. I mean, just to the name issue, in eDiscovery Assistant, we call them hyperlinked files. And the reason for that is they are files that appear at a hyperlink, right? As opposed to being physically attached to the document. There's a really good article that Doug Austin just published today on his blog from Cloudfishent. And I think I provided the link to Deja so she can add it to the post here. And it gives a really good discussion about the variety of things that people refer to these hyperlink files as and what the difference is. And there's a huge difference. And kind of I'll just bridge that into the case law discussion, which is the first time that we really talked about hyperlink files as discoverable documents was in the Nichols v. Noom case in 2021. And that one was from Judge Catherine Parker. And it was a unique set of circumstances because Noom, the parties had agreed early on, they'd recognized that there were these hyperlinks. The parties agreed that a certain number of them would be provided. And then Noom went ahead and produced its documents out of Google Apps with hyperlinks. And it turned out that there were almost 10 times as many hyperlinks in the collection that was produced as the plaintiffs anticipated. And so they went to the court and asked Noom to go back and reproduce them. And the court made this pronouncement where she said, hyperlinks are not attachments. And that was problematic in the eDiscovery space, as you might expect, because when you have a hyperlinked file that it is attached to a responsive message or is otherwise responsive under the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, it likely should be produced. So then we evolved a bit in the thinking to really starting to distinguish from hyperlinks to hyperlinked files. And I created, and if you watch our eDiscovery Day webinar, which will also drop a link from our academy, you'll see a whole discussion of this case law. So I'm not going to spend as much time on it today, but from Nichols, we moved to the NRA Google consumer privacy case. And in that case, the court really looked at the volume of hyperlinks and really kind of took a sampling approach for it and ordered a specific number of documents to be produced at hyperlinks based on some information from plaintiffs that suggested they were key and relevant. We then moved to the NRA StubHub refund litigation in April of 2023. That litigation, StubHub agreed to provide links or the documents at hyperlinks and ultimately determined that they could not. And they put it in the ESI protocol that they would do it. The court ordered, hey, you guys put this in your protocol. You got to live up to what you put in your protocol. An agreement is an agreement. Some really great language. And I believe most all of these cases we covered on Case of the Week, so they're accessible via the blog as well. NRA StubHub then came back a year later to the court and said, hey, we've continued to try and we've spent a whole bunch of money doing it, and we cannot pull all of these documents. We can't get the contemporaneous versions. The technology just isn't there to allow us to do it. And the court said, your ESI protocol says you can be released from obligations here for good cause shown. And if the technology isn't available, that's good cause. So we really let them out of that. The NRA to Uber Tech's passenger sexual assault litigation is my favorite decision on the hyperlinks issue. That one's from Judge Cisneros, where she really required the parties to sit down and have discussions about what was technologically possible to collect documents from hyperlinks from Uber. And what's important in all of these cases is that each party has a different technology where hyperlinked files are used, and the technologies that existed at that time to collect documents from those hyperlinks are all different. So you really have to pay attention to what are the technologies where the hyperlink files are stored, created and stored, what technologies exist to allow us to go and get them, and what do those technologies really allow us to do? So can we collect a contemporaneous version? Is there any ability to create metadata to associate the hyperlinked file with the original parent document, right? And what do we even call that parent? We still don't really know. There's a subsequent UberText, NRA UberText ESI protocol that the parties entered into with language that Judge Cisneros ordered in that previous decision, which is excellent language and one that I routinely recommend folks look at as a baseline for evaluating, how to address these in your own ESI protocols. So I highly recommend that one. And we'll provide all the links to these cases. And then we talked about the NRA StubHub refund litigation. So there are other decisions. There's a couple of decisions in which Meta was involved, in which at one point Meta said, and I think it was the UAB planner case, Meta said, we can't provide all these documents, but we've reviewed them and they're not relevant, which was interesting because if you manage to review them, how can you not provide them? But Meta also had a subsequent or an earlier decision in the NRA Meta Pixel case where they managed to convince the court that even though they had Microsoft Purview, which had some functionality at the time to allow them to collect hyperlinked documents, they claimed that it would interrupt their eDiscovery workflow. And so they somehow managed to convince the court that they should not be required to provide hyperlinked files.
I love these because it's almost like Obi-Wan Kenobi. These aren't the docs you're looking for.
These aren't the docs you're like, you're so right. Oh my God. I'm such a huge Star Wars fan. That's so good. I'm going to use that going forward.
Yeah. But what's also so fascinating about this moment is we've got reality and conflict with the desires of the parties or stipulations of the parties. It's so interesting. And it reminds me of those moments where it's like, you were supposed to process these documents and give us custodial information, get it from the documents. It's like custodians are assigned. It's not extracted.
Right.
And so let's make sure we know what we're talking about here, because that's not possible.
You raise a great point. And Aaron, you did something recently on this, on hyperlinked files on LinkedIn that you posted, your deep fake watermark that I want you to talk about. But just to reference again, that eDiscovery Day webinar, because we talked about some of this. So I encourage folks to go back and listen to that. What was the thing that you posted on LinkedIn about this issue?
So it was a thought experiment. So taking some of these cases and just thinking, what would it mean if a corporation's electronic communication policy became, you can only use hyperlinked files. You're not allowed to attach documents, so that there is no parent-child relationship. And you have to get permission from the legal department to do it. And you have to get permission from IT. It was a joke, right? And it says subject to the jester's privilege. It has this watermark that says
throwing it out there. What if this is what
super fake?
We never know. I mean, we've moved away from
what if
files. Now we've moved to hyperlink files. I mean, you could ultimately preclude
do this.
Attachments. Yeah.
Now, why would you do it? And because I was thinking, this is kind of absurd. But then kind of putting on my lawyer's hat, I was like, wait, but if I send somebody an attachment in an email, if they forward that to somebody else, that person can open it if it's not password protected. Right. But if I send a hyperlink file, the access controls on that will keep them from opening it. That's actually interesting. And then there's also storage size, right? You're not going to bloat your mailbox.
Yeah.
And so there were some, it seems like there are legitimate reasons for doing this. And so long as you're not like intentionally frustrating discovery with this policy, I could see somebody trying it.
Yeah. And Stephanie, just to kick that over to you, like you mentioned, there's a lot of implications on the hyperlink files issue for the knowledge management world.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think your scenario is that far-fetched, Aaron, actually, because like if you think about, even now, if you operate in Microsoft 365 and I send somebody, I almost never attach a Word. I almost said physical, and that's not the right word, but attach a Word document. It's just a link to go find it in, OneDrive or SharePoint or whatever. And it's the norm, but it's still exactly in line with how I used to send a file. I'm not doing anything in my brain any different. I'm like, here's a Word file, So I don't think that's that far-fetched. I mean, putting in the policy that will only do that is a little bridge farther.
So you only use links?
Well, no, I mean, like, I think it's just not specifically intentionally, but most often I feel like I end up sharing links these days.
Microsoft defaults to a link, and I always undo it and attach it.
Yeah.
So I do the opposite, which is interesting. I wonder.
it's because it defaults. I'm like, well, that's fine. And I'm not doing anything. Knock on wood, that has hopefully any eDiscovery implications down the road. It's just like with my content team, like, here's a draft, review this article, but it's just, as the technology progresses, these hyperlinks are just part of what we're doing. So to ignore them is just contrary to reality of technology right now.
And I think it's really interesting because we don't think of hyperlinks on the same level as like a generative AI. I was listening to Brene Brown's podcast yesterday, and one of the things they were talking about generative AI, and she was commenting that what happens when technology moves faster than policy. And that is, it feels like that's where we live 100% of the time in eDiscovery.
That's reality.
And hyperlinks are a very solid example of that situation, right? I mean, in my view, you look at the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure and a party's obligations to provide documents under Rule 26, those documents should be provided, and if you've created technology that doesn't allow you to go and get them, you're a serial litigant. And these are some of the points that Judge Cisneros addressed in the In Re Ubertex case. You got to be prepared to provide them. So you have some responsibility for the technology that you choose and the capabilities that you lock yourself into. And if that requires you to do more manual work, which it can be a lot of what's required to get documents at hyperlinked files, then that's what you're on the hook for. So it was interesting because she was very willing to evaluate the party's obligations in the scope of the technology, but also in the scope of what their requirements are under the rules. And it's the first judge I've really seen do that. And so I think we're going to start to see technological developments here. I'm not a huge prediction person. I know you guys both have your predictions that I want to talk about, but I really think we're going to see, I thought by this time this year, now we would have seen the improvements to allow us to do things like that. Microsoft did just roll out some changes where that if you implement a retention policy in Teams, anytime you put a legal hold in place after that retention policy is in place, the documents and the hyperlinked files will be preserved for messages that you have put a hold on to that date of that retention policy. But if your data goes back earlier than that retention policy, you're not going to have it. So it's going to take a while for the technology to catch up with what are our traditional preservation obligations. And I think there can be a lot of, cases are won and lost in civil litigation on the documents. How are we not providing the documents at hyperlinked files? That's just it's got to be fixed.
Well, and I also question, you mentioned that setting in Teams or whatever, that these are optional settings you can put on right now, and people can just whatever level of willfulness is there, choose not to retain these documents when they know maybe they should because they're not required to. Like, at what point is that balance going to tip where it's just you're doing something wrong if you're not putting in place these options that are right at your fingertips to put them in place?
I would agree. I think it's going to be a question of what is your obligation to preserve, and does it mean if you have the capacity in-house to trigger that functionality and you don't do it. Yeah. Then again, what some of the case law seems to suggest now, what the In Re Ubertex case with Judge Cisneros is, look, if you know that you have technology and you know you're a serial litigant who's going to have to produce information, you need to take the steps to be able to be prepared to produce it or to do whatever manual work's required. Aaron, you had a comment.
Well, one thing one bit of the nitty-gritty was that I think we all agree that responsive documents that are in scope, which many of these hyperlinked files would be, should be produced if they're responsive, non-privileged. But I think one of the hangups here is the creation of a family relationship between the two.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right, because the software can extract an attachment from the MSG wrapper or the EML wrapper in an actual email message, and you see that it's in there. Which, by the way, is one of my favorite little things to point out is that if you're hosting the native email and all the attachments are still in the native email. So you're hosting them twice in a lot of scenarios. But what's interesting is those relationships are kind of embedded within that file. And so if you have to actually go out and create a relationship between something that's over there, at Georgetown, Paul McVoy, who I think was part of the one of these cases, I forget which one, he was saying it's a simple script, and
That's
maybe
my
it is.
thought. It really,
Yeah.
I don't understand why it's that complex to create a metadata field. We do it all the time.
We sure do.
We create custom metadata fields for data because we know that there's one metadata field in a particular case that we really need to see. And we just write a little script to create that metadata. I mean, we do it with redaction, right? People didn't used to do this. We ask for, in our ESI protocol, a redaction field that's populated yes or no. So we can search, we can filter by yeses, and then people can review those redactions for privilege out of the gate, right? I mean, one of my big soapboxes is you got to review your productions when they come in. The longer you sit on them, the less ability you're going to have to be able to challenge anything. And the courts are so pushing parties to move everything forward quickly now.
So Kelly, I'm sharing a meme right now of Winnie the Pooh, and he's oh,
right.
Now you see it.
Oh yeah. The overlay is my friend.
Exactly. And it's so like, I actually have a one that I made with AI that has a beer that has an overlay label on it. eDiscovery giving you a hard time, crack open an overlay.
Yeah, well, that's about right. I mean, and if you don't know how to use overlays, you got to find tech people that know how to help you. And the best thing that I've found is when you're an attorney and you say, here's what I need to be able to see. Like, you don't need to tell them technically exactly what needs to be done. Like, if I came to Aaron and said, I need to be able to I need a metadata field that's going to show me this. I know we have that information. And you go, okay, great. No problem. I just write this quick script, I overlay it here, and suddenly I have a field that's populated. So lawyers, tell your technical people what you need and let them help you identify the technical solution to get what you need.
Yeah. That's 100%. In working with my tech team, I tell them the result I want. I don't tell them how to do it because it would take me forever. And the way I'm going to do it is so clunky.
Exactly. And they don't need to know, and they don't want to know, right? That's the whole purpose of the relationship between legal tech support and litigators, right? Is they need your help to be able to see and get the information organized the way that they need it. We also talked a little bit coming into today about the impact on ESI protocols for hyperlinked files. And Stephanie, I thought you had some comments on this about folks that you've talked to, as well as what we expect to see in the future.
I'm trying to remember what I said now. This is embarrassing.
Oh, sorry.
It was so good. It was so good.
I know. It was like a fit of genius, and I don't remember it.
Yeah. I think it was along the lines of, this is yet another issue that you've really got to be on top of going into your ESI protocols. And you can't wait until you're trying to negotiate the ESI protocol to learn it. It's yet one more reason why you have to be understanding your client's data sources early on in a matter or before a matter. We're kind of back to needing data maps again, needing refreshed data maps.
Well, and
I
think
templates, Stephanie. I think we're talking about templates.
I'm glad everybody remembers what I said, but I really was struck by that quote you said a few minutes ago about the technology always moves faster than policy. I feel like that should be the motto of the eDiscovery industry, because I've been saying forever that eDiscovery professionals are the ones that are always on top of how technologies work before most people, because they have to be. Mm-hmm. So again, I mean, and this is what we'll get into, what I'll get into at U of F about preserving prompts and things too. Like, you just need to be thinking about these things. And it's harder to go back and add stuff in. Just think about it now. If you know this is coming down the road, put it in your policies now, put it in your protocols now. I mean, it's like trying to shoehorn things in later. Like you were saying, review documents early. Don't wait. It's harder and harder to find things.
Know what your capabilities are, right?
Yeah.
Look at the tools that are out there in the market. If you use Microsoft Teams, look at Purview. One great change that was made, I'm not sure whether it was this year or last year, was that Microsoft now allows you to have only one or more licenses on E5. It used to be you had to pay for the whole organization on E5 if you wanted E5, and that was so cost prohibitive, no one would do it. And Microsoft wants people to use their eDiscovery tools that they're building, and they're continuing to iterate on it. There was a great discussion, and we'll drop the link in the notes, between, I think it was Tom O'Connor and Rocky Messing and Stephanie Beers from Microsoft, where she talked about all the work that they've been doing. And of course, Rocky used to be at Microsoft, and so he and Stephanie had worked together. So it's a great discussion. It's really worth listening to. There's a second one with Armand from, he built Forensic Evidence Collector. It's called FEC. That's the tool that's actually mentioned in the Noom case back from 2021, and other folks have mentioned it. That tool allows you to collect hyperlinks from Google, but not from Google Vault, right? Which is the problem in the Uber case. Mm-hmm. So again, you got to know your technology. You got to know what the capabilities are. So go out and learn these things. If you're dealing with clients and you don't get the information from the client up front, know what's available and out there and ask the questions. What are the technologies you're using? How are you archiving things? Is there a combination of Vault with Microsoft? What are we doing? So we can really understand. You can at least have a baseline knowledge, but you got to spend some time in advance.
Yeah, and even give them a list of popular ones, because they might not even know all the technologies they're using. But if you give them a list, then they'll be like, oh yeah, we do use that.
Right. And what capabilities are there? I mean, ask does someone have access to E5 on your Microsoft Teams? And the answer may be no, but counsel are going to have to go to IT to learn those answers. And I get a lot of questions from folks always saying to me, oh, how are you know so much as a lawyer, blah, blah, blah. How are you so technical? I'm like, because I just ask questions. I'm just not afraid to ask questions. And, I've had my share of IT people go, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I don't know. Why don't you tell me what I'm talking about? Here's what I'm trying to solve. Here's what I need to know. You talk to me. And then they talk to me and I type as fast as I can. And then I ask follow-up questions, right? I mean, you have to learn. You have to be dumb until you get smart. And every new technology requires you to start over again. You just got to get out.
I'm going to share one. I'm going to share a meme for you.
Great. Didn't learn eDiscovery in law school, huh? Yeah, they said we have people for that. Right. Yeah. Well, it's interesting to me, because I just taught at CU last year for the first time, and I'll be picking that back up again. But everyone says that this generation, because they grew up with phones and technology, that they know eDiscovery. No, they don't.
So not true.
No, they don't. They don't have any clue. So they know how to create, store, send, and receive electronic information in a variety of ways. Text messages, Signal, WhatsApp, Yammer, TikTok, whatever you got. But they don't think about it as evidence or how to go and get it, which is exactly what eDiscovery is. So it was fascinating. I stood up the first day and said, okay, guys, tell me some sources of ESI. And they were email. Nobody said mobile phones. So I held up my phone and I was like, hello, what about the phone?
Everything on this.
Well, that's important. What do you mean? So I think any kind of misnomer whatever we have, that the younger generations know and understand ESI because they've been creating electronic information is a false narrative.
No, they're just really great at creating data. They're probably more prolific in creating data than anyone ever. But what happens to that data, or even thinking of it as discoverable data, is a completely different question.
And the kinds of data they create too is what is problematic for us, right? We're used to text, we're used to Word documents, we're used to things like that. All this audio, all this video, it's expensive. You got to OCR it. You got to have it translated. You got to have all these things. It's much more complex now to handle a collection of information than it was 5 years ago, even.
Although, what's really cool, something I learned recently with Dropbox. I have all these pictures for the last, 15 years uploaded there. And I was looking for a specific picture and I didn't know what it was called because I never named it. Mm-hmm. Because of AI, because of computer vision, it can see what's in the picture. And I searched for tuxedo and it found my prom picture so that I could show it to my son. And we look exactly the same. He's 13 and I was 16, but we look exactly the same. But I didn't have a name for it. I was just searching for what was in it. Mm-hmm. And it came up.
I do the same thing on my iPhone. right? My husband and I were picking out pictures for the Christmas card, and I'm like, oh, I had this great picture or whatever. And, so I searched just using the name or whatever on my phone, and just like that.
Well, that's because we're search term people, right? Like we grew up with search terms.
No, but like I did it the other day. I was trying to find a picture of something I once saw in a museum sometime in the last 2 years. And then I just typed in doll in my photos, and it brought up all these options. And it was like one of the first 5. I was like, oh, yeah.
Because it creates all this metadata, and then it just goes and looks at things and adds more metadata to your photos. It's crazy. Yeah. And I think that's a perfect segue to our next topic, which is the topic of all topics, right? Generative AI. And just to start, because Steph, I want to turn to you for thoughts because you had a lot. To be clear, we've been using AI for years. If you get Netflix recommendations, if you get podcast recommendations, if you get anything that's recommending stuff to you based on choices you've already made, that's AI.
Yeah.
Generative AI is when you ask AI to create something for you, whether it's text, a video, audio files, an image, whatever, and it's actually generating that content for you. And the generative AI is what's really big. And this is yet another example of technology outpacing policy. So
faster than ever.
I know. I'm going to turn that over to you, Steph.
Well, yeah, because yes, AI it's far from new, and it's not even anywhere near new in legal. Just this Gen AI boom has just put it on a lot of people's radar that weren't thinking about it. But the technology itself is moving so much faster than other technologies before it, even that if we couldn't get policy to keep up with technology before this, like now it's like this light speed ahead. It's breaking all the rules of how fast technology progresses. We are really in a world where people are just using this because it's also so much more accessible. The big thing ChatGPT did, and it's not a legal tool, I always have to say that, but the big thing it did is put this technology right in people's hands in a way that hasn't happened before. It was like every single person with an internet connection can suddenly play around with Gen AI and feel the magic and just get swept up in it. So that was actually brilliant on OpenAI's part. Obviously, I don't agree with everything they ever do, but that was like getting it in people's hands and making it so easy to use and get people to buy in. It was so fast.
And just for people, Steph, who maybe aren't as familiar with or are very overwhelmed with the discussion of generative AI, and they're like, stop talking about it. I don't want to hear about it anymore. How do you use prompts in ChatGPT? Because that's your discussion at UF. How do you use prompts in ChatGPT to create content?
Yeah. So prompts, no matter what tool you're using, very generally speaking, prompts work the same way. I mean, there's just like a little box, you type it in, like a picture. It's like the chat on the side of this, you put it in a little box like that, and you tell it what you want it to produce. And the more successful, where prompt, and for a while, prompt engineering was the big term, is that you can put more and more detail in your prompts. Like you could be like, give me a picture of a flower, and who knows what it'll give you. Or, write me a poem. But if you say something like, I want a picture in widescreen aspect in, watercolor style, and it should be pink and these, whatever, you'll get a totally different response. So the more information you give it, the more.
And if you say, I want an orchid that's pink and white, and I want it in this kind of setting, and I love the watercolor view.
I know.
It does. And it can be amazing what can be generated. But policy wise, there's so many problems with it, right? Because, and these are a lot of the lawsuits that OpenAI is facing, is they've scraped a lot of data off the internet, some of which is copyrighted. And I'm not speaking to the merits of the litigation at all, because I haven't paid attention to a lot of it. So please do not take this as any sort of basis of that. But that's the challenge, right? And artists who have created visuals are being uploaded and people will use prompts to ask for changes to that art. And there are a lot of questions about copyright violations associated with generative AI, which I think is a huge problem.
Yeah, I was never an IP lawyer, but modern IP law doesn't fit with Gen AI. It just doesn't. So it's either people are trying to make existing law apply to something that is just not, it's like a square peg round hole, or this has a potential to completely rewrite copyright law, trademark law.
And I would say even that statement of policy moving faster than, or tech moving faster than policy, moving faster than the law, which is not surprising, right? I've always felt like eDiscovery, the law in eDiscovery and the changes to the rules and things have moved a lot faster than anything else we've seen in the law. But we're just in such political gridlock at the moment in Washington that I don't know how we get the policy we need on AI in the United States. What were we going to say, Aaron?
Well, I was going to jump in with a quick meme to explain prompts.
Great.
Love
and it. Think of Harry Potter with the book in Chamber of Secrets, right?
Yep. And he writes his name. He writes, "My name is Harry Potter."
And ChatGPT writes back, "Hello, Harry Potter. My name is ChatGPT." You know, it was in the book, it was Tom Riddle. But the one of the things that's really interesting about the prompting and what it can do is it keeps changing also.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a prompt engineering course through Coursera and with Vanderbilt University, and ChatGPT 3 was what they used.
Mm-hmm.
And in that scenario, when you're watching what the professor's doing, it can actually output a PowerPoint. Make me a PowerPoint, and you have a PowerPoint you can download and open. It doesn't do that anymore. Now you ask it for a PowerPoint, and it'll give you the text that you can put on your slides, unless you know how to prompt it. In which case, and I think I'm going to make a video about this, where you ask it to create the Visual Basic encoding, and then you drop that into a macro, and you can tell it, here's your text. I want you to find images. I want a design that has high contrast, that has technology, motifs, whatever. You give it the description. It will actually, if you want it to, it'll do the research. But if you already have something, you drop it into the macro, you hit run, and it creates a beautiful presentation with moving backgrounds, with the motifs you're looking for, the color schemes you're talking about, your text. I mean, it's one of the ways that I've been making macros for Excel for analyzing DAT files, which I have another one coming out soon. So it's this really interesting thing where you can, it'll program in 5 minutes. It'll give you the text you need to run a macro to find Bates gaps in a DAT file.
And that's just another example, I think, of how you leverage your tech folks, right? I mean, one of the things that I talk about a lot is this gap between the lawyers and the tech folks, right? The tech folks have so much potential for helping, but they don't know what's happening in your case or what the problems are you're trying to solve or what you're trying to do. And if you would bridge that gap by having the tech folks involved with you from the beginning, you can solve things like knowing what you can put in your ESI protocol about hyperlinked files or metadata or whatever. You can solve this problem, right? You could say, hey, I need a really fast PowerPoint and to go to the client tomorrow, because that comes up like all the time. And how am I going to do this, right? Well, you call Aaron and he runs this quick macro and so call your folks, right? Get on with them and let them help you leverage all these tools. All this discussion that we're having is not to say that you need to be the person who knows everything, but what you need to know is what the capabilities are and who you can call to make it happen. And it's just, there's so much opportunity with AI. Now, that being said, I will tell you that my view on generative AI is there are some amazing applications for it right now. I mean, we've used ChatGPT to create summaries of all the 40,000 decisions in eDiscovery Assistant. It's huge. It's something our users had been asking for years, and it was just not possible to do it on a one-off basis. That being said, we use ChatGPT 3.0, as Aaron was talking about. Then it subsequently morphed to 3.5 and then 4.0. And wow, the summaries that we get now are 100 times better than the initial ones that we got. And so we've gone back and rerun a lot of them because it's better, it's more useful, it's helpful. And it's also so inexpensive to do that it's a huge value add. I think as the reasoning gets better with AI, it's going to have more application, but there are some incredible things right now. Identifying PII. I mean, we had some tools to do that, but the Gen AI tools that do that are so great. Tackle AI is doing some incredible stuff in that space. I just think there's so much ability. Aaron, what are your clients asking for or using when it comes to Gen AI?
So I'm glad you asked. I'm going to share a meme.
Great.
Because and this meme, for those who don't see it, it kind of it's two it's the Joker and Pennywise talking about all the existing analytics tools, kind of gesturing off in a graveyard. So we're testing a lot of.
I think that's key. All the tools that nobody's using.
Yeah, and that's part of my answer, actually. And so we are testing generative AI tools, but what really drives our use, our implementation of them, is client demand.
Mm-hmm.
And right now we don't have any. And it's, we bring it to people and, they're like, we're not ready for that. Or I'm not, and it's just.
So is it a cost? Is it trust? Why? Do you know?
Well, the cost is not insignificant.
Right.
But then there's also, I think that people are worried about being that first reported case.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not nothing.
No, it's not. It's not. You've got to have somebody who understands the technology well enough to make a solid argument to the court. You got to have a lawyer who can make that argument to the court. And
experts who are going to be able to sign those affidavits and give testimony and go in that battle of the experts. So back at my old company, my colleague was one of those experts on the Rio Tinto case when they were doing the TAR protocol. And that was like bare knuckle boxing to do that. And it was widely reported. Everyone was talking about it. It was, De Silva Moore and then Rio Tinto. And it was like, wow, this is the big deal.
For those that don't know, those were the Judge Peck decisions in which he essentially made it black letter law that TAR was acceptable to use for purposes of document production.
Right. It's black letter law. And it was like seismic, right? It just,
it was.
And so what's interesting is that a lot of the tools, a lot of the metrics and measurements that you would use in some of these newer tools are very similar to what you would do in a TAR 2.0.
We need a Rio Tinto for Gen AI. Is that what you're saying?
We do. And what's interesting is I was not
on the bench anymore, so we're going to have to look at someone else, right?
But it's interesting though that what we are using a lot of are those older tools, things like Reveal Botnet XLP, which had Story Engine, and so we get a lot of value out of that tool that was 10 years ahead of its time 10 years ago.
Right.
And so we're still using those tools to find, amazing stuff right away because of the natural language processing tool that's behind it and all the different models that underlie it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I've been saying for a while that one of my favorite side effects of this Gen AI boom that people don't talk about enough is that it has awakened more interest in technology across legal in general that I think is long overdue, because it started with, throw some AI on that, which that's not how it should work. But then you don't always need a Gen AI. Like sometimes it's overkill. Sometimes you don't even need AI. Sometimes a little bit of automation is just great. You've probably had some of those tools for 5 years and you didn't even know about it. But now suddenly you know about them because somebody told you can't get the $1 billion Gen AI tool. Yeah. So I think it is slowly reintroducing, like you were saying, older technologies that people might have overlooked.
Yep. And I'm going to go back to the prompt issue because I know you're going to talk about this, but some of these tools all require you to input prompts. And the question is, are those prompts ultimately going to be discoverable? And I think that's going to be an issue we're going to be exploring. You were talking a little bit when we chatted, Aaron, about Cecilia at Disco as a chatbot, and you're putting prompts into Cecilia. Are those?
I'm not sure they would describe it as a chatbot, but
okay.
It's just because I don't know what connotations others might have, but it's a question and answer functionality where you're able to kind of get a sense of what's in there, ask questions, get answers. And, it's not, I'm basing this on descriptions from people who've used it. I haven't actually used it because it's in Disco. But when you have non-lawyers in there asking questions, some of those questions, some of these questions may not even be legal. It may just be, what's the earliest document in the database?
But I think there's a lot of arguments. There's a lot of discussion. It's very factual. If I'm asking that because I'm trying to create a timeline of documents for purposes of deposition preparation, then that's going to be work product. And even if it's a paralegal or a non-lawyer in some other role doing it, if they're doing it under supervision of counsel and they were asked to do it for purposes, it's probably still going to be attorney-client privileged.
You ready for this? I think the best way that you're gonna have so many prompts, you're not gonna want people to go through and review it. So the best way to do it is with generative AI looking for what seems like a legal prompt.
Use Gen AI to tell me what the Gen AI prompts are.
Well,
which is not that different.
Yeah. There are tools already that are starting to preserve prompts, and I think more and more of them will do it. And I'm sure they have.
What are those? I don't know those tools. What are those tools? Do you know?
Oh God, I don't want to speak out of turn. I'm pretty sure CasePoint is doing it.
Okay.
I know there are functionalities built into Relativity that came up at Relativity Fest.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so it is like people, if you think at its very, very core,
right?
Discovery requests are data related to this case, right? Mm-hmm. Prompts are data. The more people prompt, the more and more we have more data than ever. And when you were talking about, that gap between like the non-tech people and the IT, I keep hearing more and more anecdotes that these people, like particularly in eDiscovery, broad generalization, the partners were never in these tools. They weren't getting their hands dirty. Now AI is so fun and cool. They're like, I want to play around. So they're getting in and they're doing the prompts and creating even more data and maybe least knowing how to put in a prompt or understanding what to do. Yeah. So that's where and not thinking that anyone might ever look at these things again. And I do think prompts will be discoverable. We will get to the place where people are requesting them and they have to be produced. But I do think a vast majority of them will end up being privileged. But your privilege.
And don't we have the same problem?
Longer?
Like, yeah, the same problem of technology being ahead of policy.
Yeah.
Right. Because how many people are able to preserve prompts? Does the technology exist to allow you to store your prompts? How do you produce them? What's the context? There's so many issues associated with it. Another source of ESI that has a myriad of things to consider.
There's also something I think that's really fascinating. I haven't made the video for it yet, but it's coming. In a scenario where you're paying per prompt, you're going to be really careful about the prompts.
Mm-hmm.
But in a scenario where you're having a conversation, you may not be as careful with your prompts. And one of the issues with that can be prompt priming. And here's the example that it's unbelievable that it happened to me, but it's great. I said, who are the top 5 eDiscovery influencers on LinkedIn? And it gave me a list of 5 people. I was not on it. I said, who's Gates Dogfish? And it described Gates Dogfish. And then I copy and pasted the first prompt again. And I said, I just pasted it in there. Who are the top 5 eDiscovery influencers on LinkedIn? Gates Dogfish was number 1 in the new answer.
Wow. Yeah. See, and I think when you play around more and more, you learn all of those kinds of idiosyncrasies. It's gotten a little bit better, but there's sentence recognition. You can determine what's written by AI based on the way the sentence is structured. It has certain words that it uses over and over again. And I get emails from people, whether they're asking for a job or want to work with us or whatever. And I'm like, and AI generated, click, delete. So it's really apparent. Let's kind of transition. We had one. Go ahead.
Can I do one more comment on that?
Yeah.
I think per prompt pricing is stupid, but I think it's become a knowledge management issue. Like if you have perfected, especially really long prompts that get you results you want within your organization, you should be building a prompt library so that you can reuse. Everyone can uniformly reuse that prompt to create the same template, same document, same whatever it is you're creating. So you're not reinventing the wheel. You're not reiterating your prompt as many times and adding more and more stuff to it. So prompt libraries themselves, so whether or not it's discoverable, you internally preserving your prompts is a really good idea.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree with that. So a couple things. One, I'm going to ask you guys, where do we see AI going in 2025 and how do we get people to get into the mix? What are some ideas we could use for people to use ChatGPT and just start understanding the capabilities of Gen AI?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of getting in the mix, if you've never done it, ChatGPT, like they now made it like free for everybody. Just play around with it. Not for legal work. Very clearly, do not put your client data in it. None of that. But do a sort of like, I want to plan my I need a vacation itinerary. Things like that are like not going to give away state secrets, and hopefully you'll check it over before you get on a plane that it was right. But like, just play around and see what it can do. Like the dumbest little things. Like the first thing I ever did was like write a song in the style of Bob Dylan about whatever, like just to like.
We did that for our eDiscovery jingles a couple of years ago. We used it to rewrite the lyrics to Christmas songs,
and then try to like, if it gives you something and it's not right, try to iterate on your prompt and see if it gets better. See what gets you better or worse results.
Right.
Like try to give it as persona. That's like a huge one where I heard someone talking about once. There was a whole speech given by the French president about their energy policy. And there was like one throwaway line that was like, we're not going to be doing nuclear. And everything else was about it. And if you were just like summarize this, they didn't even mention that point. But then they reran the exercise saying, you are an energy reporter. What are the key points about the energy policy? And it was at the top because it directed it what it cared about. Right. So you can give it a persona. You can like tell it how it should be looking through, especially if it's a huge volume of data.
Right. Yeah. You're a marketing professional. Do this. You're a salesperson. Do this. Yeah. All of those things. Yeah. Some other ideas you can do, workouts. I think we talked about training sessions for kids for sports. Aaron, you put me onto the Coursera course, which is an intro to ChatGPT from Vanderbilt. It's free. I signed up for it. You can just Google ChatGPT Vanderbilt and it will come up. Kat Moon does a ton of really amazing stuff at Vanderbilt. She's so great at her contributions. And, just keep asking it questions. And Aaron, you mentioned this, like ask me questions until you know enough and then ask me what's the next thing. So tell us a little bit about that.
That's my favorite. So I tell it, let's say you are a movie producer and I am a screenwriter. I have an idea for a Wall Street thriller where, XYZ. It's good. And then ask me questions about the setting, the characters, the ending, the conflicts. And I give it a whole list. Ask me questions about these things until you know enough to create an outline. Ask me one question at a time. Ask me your first question. That way you don't get those long lists of answers that it can do. And so, and I say, don't start writing the outline until you know enough. And before you write the outline, ask me whether I want you to write the outline. And it will listen, and it does that. Now, my favorite thing to do with it is if it asks me a question I don't know the answer to, I say, what's the best answer I could give to this question? And I have it answer its own question. And I would say 8 times out of 10, it's really a fantastic answer. And then I just adopt that as my answer because I agree with that. Or it'll be counterintuitive and it'll be something I wouldn't have thought of because I'm so inside my own lane. And that's my takeaway for ChatGPT is if it asks you a question you don't know the answer, ask it to answer its own question.
Yeah. And I think just get in the mix. I think as far as the case law goes, just because we're on the case of the week, generative AI kind of creeped into our case law in 2024. We added an issue tag for it to the database. There are 5 cases. They're mostly, it's talking about Gen AI as opposed to being discovery about aspects of Gen AI. So we haven't really gotten discovery decisions. We've got a formal opinion from the American Bar Association on generative AI, the New York Times versus Microsoft and the number of companies that are suing OpenAI over scraping the data. So a few things on generative AI. If you're an eDiscovery Assistant user, you can use that issue tag to be able to search for some of that case law. But I expect in 2025 that will continue to grow. You guys want to give me, we have a few minutes left and I want to turn a little bit to mobile device discovery, but do you have a couple of predictions or do we want to save those to the end? Or you've got predictions on Gen AI?
Well, I've got one prediction on AI real quick. And I think that AI security is going to be massive in 2025. I just had a conversation with somebody at a holiday party where they were talking about how users were exfiltrating data by putting it, either copying and pasting it into ChatGPT or uploading the file into it and then accessing it from outside the environment. And so while it's locked down, They can't plug in a USB. They can't drop it into Dropbox. They can put it in. They could copy and paste the information into ChatGPT and then get it on the outside. And so I think there's going to be I think this type of exfiltration is going to burst onto the scene.
Wow.
And then so whoever can solve for it is going to be very happy.
I mean, there's always going to be bad actors, right? There's always going to be people looking to game the system.
But you don't have to be a bad actor, right? Like you could just be taking trade secrets and ask, or source code. You could be taking source code and saying, help me figure out why I'm getting an error on this.
Yeah, but if you do that you're providing that, you're essentially breaking privilege or whatever protection, confidentiality you have over that information, because you're providing it to what is essentially a publicly available database. It takes all that data and it retrains on it. So
it famously happened to Samsung. Somebody leaked their proprietary source code, not intentionally, but yeah.
So there's a lot of dangerous stuff. I totally agree with you. Stephanie, you got something on Gen AI prediction?
Agents, agentic AI. I mean, we don't even need to get down the rabbit hole of what it is yet, but you might have heard it. It's the biggest buzzword in Gen AI going into 2025. And we will hear a lot about it. And like most buzzwords, some of it will just be hype and some of it will be some really cool things. So be on the lookout for that.
You know, I love agents. So the difference between an agent and an LLM, an LLM, a large language model, has a whole bunch of data associated with it that you're targeting. An agent, actually, that you're asking inquiries to, you're prompting an LLM. An agent is something that actually physically goes to the internet and does work for you. So we use agents to do research, right? So hey, we want to know and understand what the company's litigation portfolio is here, and we break it down into a variety of things. Go out to the internet and tell us what you can find, and it'll come back. Or we want research on a particular person or whatever information you might need for purposes of a piece of litigation, for marketing, for sales. There's so many ways to leverage agents, and they're not hard to build. My husband built them.
Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the internet. It could be like your entire system. Like, this is the answer I want. This is the task you are supposed to solve. I'm not going to dictate every step of it for you. They intuit on their own and figure out their own way to get the right answer without as clear direction as just like with a chatbot. You're like, ask a question and they have a script somewhere they're reading from, you know?
We actually built one that allowed us to go through an entire litigation folder and create a series of events that we needed to from an old file, right? Yeah. But it was all electronic. So it's really interesting stuff, but that allows you to build agents to stay inside your environment. So you're not giving that information to anyone else. I want to spend the last few minutes we have on what is, I think, the other biggest issue in 2024, and that is mobile device discovery. Almost every case that we are involved in as Discovery Counsel has mobile device issues. And what's come up mostly in the case law this year, and we've done 2 or 3 decisions at minimum, probably a lot more than that, on failure to preserve text messages. So there's 2 cases in particular that I would encourage you both to look at regarding text messages. Not you both, but everybody listening. Really, probably not for you guys. That's the Maziar versus the city of Atlanta. It was an employment discrimination case, and the supervisor, they didn't preserve the supervisor's phone for more than a year, and they lost like 3 text messages. And the failure to preserve those 3 text messages meant that the court denied the summary judgment motion and required the city to pay the cost to the plaintiffs of the sanctions motion and the summary judgment motion. So probably more than a $200,000 bill for failing to preserve 1 cell phone, right? Which, there are tools out there you can use. You can get a Celebrite, which preserves the whole phone. And Aaron, I'll come to you on that topic. Or you can use something like a Mode 1, which allows you to do a completely remote collection very cost effectively. I mean, if you're really cost conscious, you can even, and you have the physical phone that you're able to collect, you can even use something as inexpensive as iMazing. You just have to be able to authenticate the messages themselves. And so, I mean, iMazing is a desktop tool. It costs less than $100. These are not hard things, but the failure to preserve these messages. The other case that we covered on Case of the Week was the SafeLight case, in which the defendant left SafeLight and went to another company in violation of his contract, according to the allegations. And His lawyer told him to preserve all of his information. 8 months into discovery, he says, oh, the settings on my iPhone don't keep text messages after 30 days. And I mean, the council were on that. They were on the fact that those messages were failure to preserve. But there was a step further that I felt like they could have gone, because that setting you have to physically change on your iPhone to set text messages to delete after 30 days. The default is to keep them forever. And there's a file on the phone that tracks every change that's made to the settings of that phone. So they could have done a forensic examination of that phone, found out when he changed those settings. In that particular case, the reason that I suggest that is because the court found that there was not intent under Rule 37E2, but there was prejudice under Rule 37E1. So they got an adverse inference instruction, but if they had been able to show that he'd made that settings change after the duty to preserve arose, which it seemed pretty likely that he had, just between us, then they would have been able to show intent. I think that would have been sufficient for intent under 37E2, and they could have gotten a default judgment as opposed to an adverse inference instruction. And the reason I think that's important, and this is something that Judge Peck raised to me probably a year ago, was that adverse inference instructions may be great, but how many cases actually get to trial? And so if it doesn't go to trial, you got no sanction. It may be a settlement tool otherwise. But so in terms of mobile devices, Stephanie, I want to go to you. What are you in your conversations and the knowledge management and everything? What are people talking about?
I think it's just because knowledge management comes from the other side of like for your own benefit, not necessarily for, thinking about litigation, but it's just like, to me, the whole mobile device issue is, again, the realities of current technology. We all use mobile devices. We use multiple, and it's not a new thing. I remember someone took a picture of me in like 2007 when I was at the law firm, and I had an iPhone and a BlackBerry and a bar napkin, and I was doing work, and they jokingly, like, they posted it, and it was like 0.6 hours, like we've been using this stuff for so long. So like, again, and we talked about it earlier, if you have the abilities to retain this stuff and you're not doing it, it's not very long until that's going to be hugely problematic.
It's already hugely problematic.
Yeah, I mean,
it's telling you it's hugely problematic. So go out and get the tools, figure out what you need to do. You're going to have to preserve mobile phones. Yeah. So figure out what you need to be able to do.
I mean, in terms of like actual litigation sanctions, like we're still new in that part, but like, it's just, to me, it's a no brainer. Like, I know you might think you're being cute or whatever. This is just me being totally blunt. You might think you're being cute with all these technologies and being like, well, we don't have to do that yet. We're just going to do this other thing. Like, just do it. Just do it.
I think we're past the days of being cute.
Yeah.
Aaron, what are you seeing at Trust Point? What are clients doing?
Well, so I'll show you just a quick meme here. I don't have a lot of collection memes, but I have one on this one.
Next gen forensic collections. That's a nice one. That's a nice one.
And it reminds me, do you remember what was I'm forgetting the name of the tool, but it was like a pre-processing ECA tool that I think was purchased by Symantec. But they had a video where there was like collecting custodians, and they were like moving a wand around somebody's head, and you could see like the brain kind of progress bar filling up.
Like when Dumbledore used to pull the thoughts out of his head.
Yes, and put into the pensieve. That's right.
So it's just to carry forth our Harry Potter references.
Harry Potter and Star Wars is strong.
I know. Well, they are. I mean, they really are everything. I mean,
And there's so many of them.
I know.
So to answer your question, I am learning. I know that targeted collections. How do I say? Where do I start? We've done targeted collections and then had to go back to the source, and sometimes the phone has changed.
Right.
Sometimes they've lost the phone, or they've upgraded the phone, or there are a lot of reasons that like the phone might have changed, and then it's problematic. And it would have been great if you had preserved the whole phone, but is that over collection? Does the client actually want you to have their entire phone?
Right. That's the big issue, I think, is the privacy.
And so,
of clients.
Exactly. And so what the forensic partners that we have, what we do with them is this: like, look, this is going on to a physically encrypted drive, and it's going to be inside of an encrypted container. So this is just an insurance policy.
Right.
There are so many cases of all these sanctions for spoliation. Why not just pay $250 plus the cost of the drive, have it right there, just in case? And we're only going to do targeted searches. We're only going to pull out things that are, responsive to the date frames, date range, the search terms, etc. And we'll work with those. And if it turns out that we have to go back, instead of inconveniencing the client, instead of finding out bad news, we have the insurance policy image. We can go back to that's been sitting secure in our lab.
Yeah, and I think
it's like double encrypted.
Right. But it really depends on your case. In both of the cases that I was talking about, the SafeLight and the Mazier case, that all they needed was a few text messages. Right. And so if you know what you need from a phone, go and preserve just that. Use a targeted remote if you can, easy collection that's going to get you what you need, and a backup report to be able to say when you did the collection and how you did it, and then document what reasonable efforts you took. I mean, if you learn 6 months later that you need new data and that's gone off the phone, you've done what you're supposed to do, which is take reasonable efforts. You did the preservation that was available at the time that it needed to be. And there was no evidence that, say, a photo was going to be at issue until it came up way later. You've got,
and the documentation is key.
The documentation is key, but early preservation is so key. And I think what the point that I want everyone to take away is there's more case law now on possession, custody, and control being almost a non-issue. If your entities are encouraging or know that your employees are using their personal devices to communicate about work-related activities that are relevant or responsive in a particular litigation context, you are going to have to preserve and provide that information. And yes, we have outlier decisions on that scenario, and it really does depend on the judge, and it's not clear. It's not black letter law, but it's really important. And I would just say this, it's an insurance policy. It's a really cheap insurance policy. I mean, for the city of Atlanta, how do you explain to taxpayers that you lost $200,000 when you could have even celebrated that phone for $1,500, right? I mean, that would have been overkill for 3 text messages, but anyway. All right, let's do some final predictions. Stephanie, I'm gonna let you start. Give me a couple of predictions for 2025.
Okay. Well, I already said agents, that, that's really up there. Preserving prompt, it's going to be a thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely that. And then more generally, I just think we're still going to see a lot more consolidation and funding in legal tech. I mean, the funding numbers have been through the roof. So much consolidation, merger acquisition activity, not necessarily where I've expected it, but all of that's still going to be moving a lot. So the vendor you use today might not be here a year from now. That might not be a bad thing. That might have been bought, but yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Aaron, what about you? Predictions for 2025?
So I think the AI exfiltration is going to be a big one. I think we're going to start seeing case law about hyperlinked files outside of the communication context.
Mm-hmm. Agree with that. Yeah.
Those are the 2 big ones. And then
we don't talk much about text messages or everything we share via WhatsApp or anything that we use to, Signal is a huge one, which you can't collect directly from a device,
That's right.
I think that's a great point. Yeah.
That's right. And then I think we're going to start something that got talked about for the first time that I have noticed at Georgetown was the role of private equity in eDiscovery. And I know that it's there, and everyone kind of knows that it's there. But what no one is really talking about is the effect that it's having, is what does it mean for the people who are working at companies that are PE backed? What does it mean for, conferences that have all this money and new people showing up from PE firms? I think that the conversation around private equity in eDiscovery is going to rise to the surface, and people are going to actually start talking about what it means, how to do it right, what's the wrong way to do it, and also good outcomes versus bad outcomes.
Yeah. Those are excellent. All right. We managed to stuff as much as we possibly could into what became an hour and 15 minutes. So thank you to all of you who have stuck with us till the end. I think we probably still could have gone on much longer. Huge thank you to Stephanie and Aaron for joining me today on this anniversary episode. Going into 2025, we'll be continuing our Case of the Week series and adding additional segments on the podcast, which will be rebranded to Life and Law with Kelly Twigger. So if you want to follow our additional content, please find our podcast on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe as well. Leave us a review. That helps us get to a wider audience so we can bring more folks into the fold on how to leverage the power of ESI. Thanks very much to you both. Happy holidays to everyone, and we look forward to seeing you in 2025. Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for joining me on the Case of the Week podcast. Tune in next episode as I discuss a new decision in eDiscovery case law and identify the issues you need to be paying attention to and how they can help you do better discovery for your clients and leverage the power of ESI. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review to help others discover the show and be kept in the know on all things electronic discovery. I'm Kelly Twigger. See you next time.